Thank you. Well, who am I? Just what impression have you made of me during the time it took me to install my computer? How do you imagine my presentation is going to be? Boring? Interesting? Lecturing? Or maybe something completely different? Until now, I hadn't actually spoken a single word to you yet. Many of you are likely to have already scanned me, creating an idea of what's to come in the next 20 minutes, based maybe on the clothes I wear, my height, my weight, my hair, or lack of hair maybe even, and my body language. So, let alone my presence in this very room conveys a message. In other words, even without words, communication is always present. We cannot take it away. Well, who am I? Thank you for the introduction. My name is Jesper. I have a background working as a cabin crew member for different airlines, both in the UK and in Denmark. I now spend most of my time working with human factors, all with the aim of continuously increasing learning and heightening awareness amongst airline crews. So basically that's the driving force behind my being here today. And the topic I've chosen to talk about, understand the simplicity of assertiveness. Now, why did I choose that headline? I believe that a broader understanding of communication is essential. That good relations, teamwork, shared situational awareness and effective decision-making are the very products we gain when communication is successful, and that the way we behave is a prerequisite for safe flying. My aim with this presentation is not so much to teach you something that you don't already know. It's maybe more along the lines of making you aware of maybe some aspects you didn't know you already knew, if that makes sense. I will give a light theoretical sort of introduction, then I'll draw focus onto some practical tools that can be applied to help adjust behaviours in ourselves and in others. Not to say that adjusting a behaviour is a walk in the park. It takes a lot of hard work and a very high level of self-awareness. Well, speaking of taking a walk in the park, I want you to imagine you're doing just that. You're walking all day. You feel tired. You feel the need to sit down. Well, it's your lucky day, because as you walk along you see two benches in the park. On one of the benches sits a person whom you don't already know. So my question for you is, where on the bench or the benches would you be likely to sit? What do you think would happen if I chose the seat right next to that other person? Well, you're laughing. Well, experiments have been carried out. And within 10 seconds, that person will get their stuff together and get up and leave. On the other hand, during the courses when I confront people with their reluctance to take a seat at the far end, I sometimes get responses like, well, maybe the other person would think I don't like them. Or isn't that nice? How did you choose your seat today? How did this room fill up this morning? It's my best guess that many of these careful considerations have taken place, and it's almost as if something out of the conscious mind controls our behaviours. I will link back to this park bench scenario, as I call it, later in my presentation. In the meantime, I would like you to just think about this question. Why do we communicate? Why do humans communicate? When I ask people, I get many different answers, some of which might be to influence, to persuade, to share information, and to work together. All reasons that are perfectly legitimate and easy to understand for most people. Now, I've chosen the picture of an iceberg to illustrate why we communicate. And why have I done that? Well, because I believe that there is a reason, or maybe more, that are more basic, much more fundamental. And I believe one key reason is to be understood. Because what happens when we're understood? To influence. It's like I no longer have the need to influence people when I'm understood. To persuade. Persuasion is a way of forcing understanding onto other people, and it's fueled by the very need to be understood. So when understanding occurs, it's no longer relevant. To share information, well, successful sharing of information depends on just that, understanding. And to work together. Whenever I'm not understood, it's like something is likely to make me unwilling to cooperate. So the search for understanding from others is a very important driving force behind our communication. Well, that's a bit about why we communicate. I also want to just draw focus to how we communicate. Back in 1969, a famous American researcher, Albert Moravian, came up with a model. It's my best guess that many of you have seen it a million times before. It's been used for CRM for a long time. Well, it doesn't really matter because despite its mature age, it's still highly relevant. According to Moravian, face-to-face communication consists of three elements. The words we speak, the tone we use to emphasize meaning to those words, and our body language, and in the proportions shown. But just how did Moravian get to this result? Well, he created scenarios where there was a deliberate mismatch between these three sources of information. He was interested in finding out just which of these people chose to believe. Body language scored highly, and the tone likewise. But why? Just what important messages are body language and partly tone capable of transmitting that words are not able to do? Body language reveals what goes on the inside. It gives clues about our feelings. And whilst we often choose our words on a conscious level, body language and partly tone, I say partly because that can be partly manipulated, are generated outside the conscious mind. Take, for instance, our politicians. Many of them are highly trained in how to portray the correct body language. And yet, many of them, even the most highly trained, get caught when their emotions get the better of them. And, I refer to that as if you feel it, you will reveal it. In other words, it seems as if body language never loses its validity. Like it's always capable of transmitting something of truth. This knowledge provides useful information about just what is essential. Oh, no, let's do it again. Let's see if it comes back on. Provides useful information about just what is essential in our encounters with other people. And just how much feelings control our behaviors. And the behavior is actually just that. It's the sum of information of all of these three sources of information. It's the sense we can make from a balance or the imbalance of that. That's behavior. Well, this presentation is about assertive behavior. So what is assertiveness then? Well, if we are to make sense and believe the Moravian study, then we have to assume that more than half of our behavior is made up by body language. Body language is a conveyor of emotions. And neurological science defines emotions as impulses that are linked to our instinct of survival. And emotions are felt as bodily responses. That's just how they become evident in our body language. But what relevance does it have for you guys to know that our body language is linked to our instinct of survival? Let me ask you a question. Just what organs in the human body are most essential to my survival? What organs have we got?
Heart, lungs.
The heart, yeah. Lungs. The lungs, yeah. Maybe even the head. And, of course, the crown jewels, okay, to ensure future generations. But how does that become evident in our body language now? Three behaviors, you've probably heard of them before. We start from one end, aggressive behavior. Well, it's actually about exposing those organs, maybe just slightly. Add to that spare. Maybe even pointing a finger, you've got the impression. Submission would be the opposite. It would be where I protect myself. So that means maybe slightly closing my body, maybe turning away, maybe even looking down. You've got a degree of submissive body language. Assertiveness is in the middle. It's where I feel comfortable. It's where I'm relaxed. It's where I feel safe. And if I feel safe, you're likely to feel safe as well. And it's where I'm designed to cooperate. If we relate this back to the park bench scenario in the beginning, it's almost like assertiveness would be choosing a seat which is not right next to the other person, nor as far away as possible, but it's somewhere in the middle. Maybe you define yourself as an assertive person, and maybe most of the time you are. But what about the times when you fail? Haven't you ever been in a situation where you wanted to speak up but didn't? Maybe because the other person didn't seem interested. Or maybe you consciously chose to keep quiet. Or maybe it happened even without you noticing. And afterwards you may even have thought to yourself, why didn't I speak up? I should have. What if you had some tools that could help you? I'll be getting back to that problem of having difficulties getting your opinion through, but in the meantime, I just want to look at a very important aspect of assertive communication. Effective listening. Now, I asked this question in Orlando in April. I'm going to do it again here. How many of you, hands on heart, consider yourselves to be genuinely good listeners? Raise your hands if you do, please. Oh, I don't know. Yeah. Well, sorry?
Aspire to be.
Yeah. A few sort of hesitant hands, but
We might disagree, but aspire to be.
No. I'll go into that afterwards. But it actually looks sort of a bit less more than one third of people. But if we relate it to statistics, they show or indicate that about 1/3 of us are effective listeners. But what about the rest of us? What about the 2/3 of us? Does that mean we can't hear anything? We're not interested? Or maybe we're just so focused on other things or overwhelmed by emotions that simply rob us of the mental capacity it takes to listen. And what is effective listening? To help you understand that, I just have a funny little video, so please watch.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on, if you would just...
Don't.
Right, if I'm not mistaken, quite a few of you recognize the scenario. I just claimed a bit earlier on that at least one of my profound beliefs is that we communicate to be understood. Please allow me to rephrase that. We also communicate to feel understood. Effective listening is about understanding on more than one level. It's not just about the words. Effective listening is body language. It is taking in and acknowledging, parking my own opinions and ideas at the side. Listening eases the survival instinct. It can even take away aggression. I mean, think about it. When was the last time you met an aggressive person who showed you that they were really willing to listen to you? It doesn't happen, because those two things don't go hand in hand. Before I move on to talk a bit more about listening, I'd just like to make a little jump and talk about something else. Open versus closed questions. Now, a closed question restricts the possible answers, and it's closed because it can only be answered by yes or no, or France or Spain, or black or white, and as such it's a very black and white question. An open question does not limit the answers. It can be answered by anything, and more importantly maybe, it can never just be answered by yes or no. That's not a possibility. But why do I all of a sudden bring up questions in the middle of talking about listening? Well, because there actually seems to be a direct link between how what we listen and the types of questions that we ask. So let's get back to those statistics. Few research experiments have shown that the 1/3 of people who are effective listeners have a tendency to ask mostly open questions, whereas the vast majority inclined to ask mostly closed questions. So I want to do just that. Let's just imagine that you ask your students or your colleague or whoever it might be this closed question. Do you agree? What do you think about that question? What possible motivation lies behind asking it? If we relate that question to the park bench scenario, again, I love that scenario, don't I? Then it's almost as if my choice of answer is restricted to either sitting right next to the other person or at the far end. And what do you think the likely answer to that type of question is? Yes. Well, an American researcher back in the 50s actually found that yes is the likely answer in as much as up to 75% of cases. Then you add an extra stripe, count the rings, make it 0, and see what happens. So the next time you do catch yourself, because that's important, one of these closed questions, it may just be useful to ask yourself, will I be just as happy with a yes as I would a no? And please remember, if that's not the case, it is likely to reveal itself. It's likely to reveal itself in your body language. Why am I so keen on bringing up questioning techniques? Well, because they're another important tool when it comes to adjusting behaviors. And to give you an example to illustrate that, I want to just go back 2 weeks in time when I was sitting preparing this very presentation, drinking an awful lot of coffee, I can tell you that much, and sitting there being so focused on finding the right keywords and the right links and the right explanations, and I suppose really, and truly honestly, all with the aim of increasing my chances of being understood while I'm standing here today. I want to take you back to that time where I was sat in front of my computer.
Hi, honey. I'm home. Can you bring the cookies, darling?
Hi, honey. Yeah. Did you bring in the car keys? Now, I just gave an affirmative answer to that closed question. But, did I bring in the car keys? Let's just rewind and do it again.
Hi, honey. I'm home. Where have you put the car keys, darling?
Now, where did you put the car keys? That's an open question. What is the difference here? The big difference is that to answer that question, I don't have any option but to remove my focus from what I'm doing to answer. That open question engages the mind, and it has the power to destroy that fixation. I actually left the car keys with a neighbour because they'd borrowed the car, and I hadn't got them, I hadn't retrieved them. So not only do open questions have the power to destroy fixation, they also engage the mind, increase listening, and thereby understanding. So how do we transfer that knowledge into aviation training? Well, I want to talk about the Tenerife disaster back in 1977. We had 3 people on the flight taking the KLM Jumbo, 2 of whom we have reason to believe were rather submissive. And understandably so, because the captain is often referred to as having been highly aggressive. These are the last few words from the cockpit voice recordings in that KLM cockpit at the time. I don't know if you can see them in the back rows, but the point is, if you notice, all attempts from the flight engineer and the first officer to address the captain's fixation were made by closed questions only. And these are questions that pop up all the time. However, in this instance, they didn't work. When I ask people and bring up this scenario, I get answers like, well, I would have just said, stop, what you're doing is wrong. And in a perfect world, it makes sense that something like that, yes, would have probably been more efficient. But think about it. Would your emotions really always allow you to do that? What if the flight engineer or the first officer, they were the resources, they had the resources in the flight deck. They were there, they could use them. But what if they'd asked maybe, where's the other aircraft? Now, personally, I'm wondering whether the simple knowledge of what an open question can do could have potentially removed the captain from his fixation, destroying that shield his aggression, and averting the world's worst aviation disaster today. Well, at least in a theoretical context, it's a possibility. And I have a suspicion that some of you might be sitting there thinking, well, this was back in 1977, the world is different now. And yes, many things are different. Many things have changed. Meanwhile, we do sometimes continue to see accidents where a lack of assertiveness was a direct result of the disaster. So, if I ask myself, could this happen nowadays? The only answer I can find is that as long as there are human beings with emotions, the answer must be yes. However, when assertiveness fails, an open question at hand could become a submissive somebody's best friend. On NaviMinds, we believe that the widespread assumption that a behavior is something we choose, simply choose, is faulty. It's not that simple. Behaviors are very hard to change. We do, however, believe that they are easier to adjust if we know what to work with. We talk about the difference between knowledge and skills, and we even talk about the importance of integrating these so they connect. Most of us know what an open question is, yet very few of us are skilled at applying them when it comes to real-life settings. Most of us know that listening is important. We even enjoy being listened to. But where are the skills in this area if it's true that only 1/3 of us are good at it? Conversely, most of us are extremely skilled at reading body language. It's essential to our survival. So reading body language is about optimizing our chances of just that. From an evolutionary perspective, reading body language is about survival, but in aviation, body language can provide important clues of a person's intentions, serving as a warning sign of impulsive reactions lying ahead that could lead to catastrophic consequences. And in that light, it makes very good sense to educate people more about it, since body language is the backbone of more than half of our behaviours. There's a lot to get there. We know that teams tend to do better in many circumstances, and we even talk about a synergy effect, meaning that 1 + 1 = 3 or more. People understand that. Synergy can be defined as the sum of information held by all individuals of the team. And whenever aggression or submission submerges or emerges, it's a sign that that flow of information, which is so fundamental, is in danger. If we start to train these areas, we're more likely to connect knowledge and skills in the long run. This can be done through exercises where we look for the deliberate presence or absence of these elements and learning to debrief them properly. If we do that, we believe we've come a long way in achieving a lot of the goals that we're trying to do via CRM and human factors training. So we urge you to go back to your training rooms, or whatever you do with your wife at home in the sofa, to play and explore the benefits of effective listening. See what it can do. Use and train open questions and explore their power. And expand your knowledge of non-verbal communication, and you will actually gain a whole new insight into adjust behaviors, not just in yourself, but also in others. Before I finish up here, it's just one last thing I'd like to communicate, which is quite important to me, and try to be aware of when you yourself, or maybe a colleague, or your students, place overwhelming importance on words. Words are vital, yes. When it comes to standard phraseology, when it comes to communicating with air traffic control, and when it comes to cross-checking information. But when it comes to dealing with human behaviors, then they are often problematic, because when we assume the only truth is found in words, then we disregard people's need to sit exactly where they feel comfortable on the park bench. And that was the bumpy road to understanding the simplicity of assertiveness. You may unfasten your seatbelt.
Very much, Jesper. Do we have any questions for Jesper? Yes.
Hi, Jesper. Thank you very much for that really interesting presentation. But I just wonder, you mentioned body language, and I just wonder if you could give us some thoughts about body language versus culture, because it's my impression that body language is rather culturally bound and culturally specific.
Yes.
So, do you have anything to say about that?
I mean, a lot of sort of fundamental body language is actually universal. Of course, there are little differences that depends on cultural things. I think that what we really want to do is to get people to become curious about it and start paying attention to what happens. Because, I mean, if we train people with the aim of enabling them to just say, oh, well, you just did that, and that means that, then we're just back on the same track, I believe, where, oh, I know more than you. So I do believe that it's also a way to get to know yourself better, to get to know when you've actually overstepped a mark. And you talked about the micro, and those are exactly what I'm referring to, really. So I think it's the awareness and the curiosity around it. Words are important, yes, but not always. There's something missing when we just... yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Alan doesn't need a
Do
microphone.
you not need a microphone?
No.
Thank you for getting back to basics. I personally really appreciate that, because these days we so often overlook the basics. But my question is that it's one thing to know what you talked about. It's another thing to train ourselves and our people
Yes.
to gain the ability to do it and maintain that ability. Because to me, it's a skill that we can lose very quickly if we don't keep it going.
Absolutely. And I think it's a matter of where do we put the goalpost, or where do we want to go. I mean, it's a process. So I regard it as small steps, and any small step is a step in the right direction. I think if we think that we can achieve that by just putting people on a 5-day course, then we're fooling ourselves, basically. So I think the solutions have to be more long-term and used slowly, and finding ways of doing that if it is to actually make a difference in the long run. And I regard CRM, regardless of what the approach is, I still see that as being a process. Just creating that little thought. So, for instance, what I say to people is try not to focus on all of this, but choose to focus maybe on one thing and pay attention to what happens. Again, because multitasking and all that sort of stuff, we're not going to increase learning if we throw too many things at people at the same time. And that's the big danger, I think, really, to simplify, get back to basics.
No, I can do that, Mike. In terms of flight crew, we're talking about flight crew here. Normal situations and normal emergency situations, because when we are in a sort of generic linguistic lab like today, it's easy to reflect on these things, and you can be very aware. But it's a totally different ballgame when you're out there and it's an emergency situation.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, it's a very good question actually, because my thoughts are that a lot of this work starts way before. Okay, so when an emergency situation happens, the important work should have been done way before that. So if we've put all these stones down and it works, and there is a good chemistry on the bench between people, then we're more likely to not end up in a situation that could be potentially threatening. So a lot of this work, because of course, you can't sit on the flight and think, oh, I've got to think about an open question now. So you can only do that if you train it. I don't know if that sort of thing. Yeah?
Anything else? Well, thank you very much, Jesper. Thank you.